members network of a similar cross-sector model to the partnership, on a mission to design out loneliness in our cities and communities. I'm new to the partnership and I'm new to Bristol, and I'm excited to see so many faces from so many different organisations, all on a shared journey to reduce their carbon emissions. So just a few Zoom housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be recording this call, so please feel free to switch off your video if you prefer to. And all attendees are muted, but you're welcome to use the chat, and we encourage you to share your experiences and learnings with each other throughout this session. There will be an opportunity to ask questions directly to the panel during the Q&A later on. And if you would like to share on social media, please use the hashtag #ClimateActionBristol. So the Bristol Green Capital Partnership is a unique network made up of over 1,000 member organisations and businesses from across all sectors who have pledged to work towards a sustainable city with a high quality of life for all. We think we are the largest partnership of our kind in the world, and we're happy to hold on to that thought. And it's our mission to work together to explore the climate and ecological challenges that our city faces and develop collaborative solutions that involve everybody. Last month, we launched our Climate Action Programme to help organisations reduce their carbon emissions, whatever their starting point. The purpose of the programme is to facilitate connection, promoting best practice, identifying solutions to challenges, and fostering a sense of community and momentum among organisations in Bristol that are committed to taking action. And today, as part of the Climate Action Programme, we launched the first Climate Action Breakfast to help you get started on your climate action journey. And because of the support of NatWest and Bristol City Council, this programme is free for businesses and organisations to get involved in. And we're really looking forward to working with you to identify and overcome barriers to progress and short-circuit learning where possible to make the city's transformation as fast and fair as possible. It's an exciting moment for me personally, as it's my first opportunity to host a partnership event. And it's also a big moment on the partnership's journey as we roll out an exciting range of initiatives to help your organisation fast-track its climate action. Our Climate Leaders Group is already underway, and we're soon to launch our Intention to Action clinics, which we'll talk more about a bit later on. And finally, we will be creating and sharing resources, useful tools, guides, and case studies to help disseminate learnings. The first of these resources, a carbon footprinting guide, written especially for busy SMEs in mind, provides a user-friendly introduction to measuring your organisation's carbon footprint, and there'll be more to follow. We've also published the first Spotlight Series article focused on green energy tariffs for businesses, which may be more complicated than you think. Links to these resources will be shared in the chat, along with details of how to become a member of the partnership if you're not already. It is our aim to support organisations, whatever their starting point, to equip you with new knowledge and insights across a range of topics, to share case studies, expertise, and resources to expand your understanding. We want to demonstrate the efforts being made by local businesses and organisations to inspire you to scale up or accelerate your organisation's carbon reduction plans. And ultimately, we want to create a sense of belonging with other organisations within this community who share the same wish to help Bristol reach net zero by 2030, because this problem is too complex for any one organisation or sector to solve alone. And we believe we can do so much more together than we can alone. So we're going to do a quick poll now, asking you to indicate where your organisation is at on its climate action journey. Hopefully you can all see that on the screen. This year marks a significant moment. I heard something recently, I think it might have been something Jessica shared, that really struck me. And we're now closer to 2050 than we are to 1990, and we still have a long way to go. Bristol has a goal to become carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2030. That's 20 years ahead of the national government's target. And businesses and organisations have a huge role to play. Bristol is home to 18,300 businesses and organisations, and together there's the opportunity to reduce 5,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide emissions per year, which is equivalent to nearly 1% of the UK's business carbon footprint. So we're going to see where we're at with the poll. So it's quite a broad spectrum. It is looking like most organisations have started to take action to reduce emissions, which is great. But there's also people here that is maybe somewhere on their journey, not too sure, or haven't started yet. So what it shows us is the breadth of different progress amongst this group and the opportunity available for peer learning and inspiration, to hear from experts, share insights, ask questions, and collaborate. And to kickstart this, we're joined by a stellar lineup this morning. Introducing today's topic is the brilliant Jessica Ferrow, co-founder of 12, elected director of Bristol Green Capital Partnership, and member of the One City Environment Board, who will be talking us through how a climate journey must start with your why. And we're delighted to hear from Annabel Harford, environmental manager at Avon Fire and Rescue Service, who will be sharing how they measure their carbon emissions, how to plan, some top tips on getting started, and how to overcome common challenges. We also have a live Q&A session with Jessica and Annabel, so please do think about any questions that come up for you, and you'll have the opportunity to put your hand up and ask the panel directly. We'll also be hearing from 5 organisations who will be pitching their products and services to help your organisation accelerate its climate action. And finally, we hope as many of you as possible can join us for an optional networking session at the end to make connections and share any reflections from the event. So before we kick off, let's just take a moment to land. It's early in the morning, so have a stretch and just send a smile to someone on the call. Now, we're going to just take a few moments to listen to this soundscape and visualize Bristol in 2030, a city that has achieved its net zero goal and is a thriving and nature-rich city for all. That was the sounds of the springtime blackbird. So to get started, I'd like to introduce Jessica Ferrow, elected director of Bristol Green Capital Partnership and member of the One City Environment Board, who will be sharing insights on where to start with climate action. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you everyone for having me here. Well, it was so lovely hearing the blackbirds. A nice way to start the day. Okay, so I'm going to, oh, I'm not allowed to share my screen, so hopefully Laura can enable that. It's still not letting me do it. Oh, is it because Alice is still sharing the sound? Yeah, there you go. All right. Okay. Is that all good? Can everyone see my slide? Yeah, great. Okay. So I thought I'd start today by being super practical. So I think on the call today, we've got 51 people, and a lot of you are going to be at different stages of your journey. But I think because this is the first breakfast, it's really important to start at the beginning and keep it really simple to begin with, because taking climate action can be really overwhelming. So we have to get those fundamentals in place first. So this is me and my co-founder, Ellie. We founded 12 in 2018 after we read the IPCC report, which said we had 12 years to avert climate catastrophe. And our logo ticks down every year. We've got 12 time bars there just to remind us of the urgency of this. And yeah, so our mission is all about helping businesses respond to the climate and ecological crisis. These are some of the brands we've worked with. So yeah, today we're just going to be sharing some of the things that we work with our clients on, but this is really kind of the starting point. So today I've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to go super quick. I think it's being recorded, or I don't know if it's being recorded, but anyway, yeah. So hopefully you can watch back if anything's unclear, and also these slides will be shared afterwards, and I've put some links in the slides as well. So what we'll cover is what Bristol's goals are, what are scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, what's the difference between carbon neutral, zero carbon, and net zero carbon, where are your scope 1 and 2 emissions coming from, and how do you get them to zero, and how do you get started? So only 15 minutes, it's not long. So as I say, I'm going to go. Right, so what we have to do, this is the temperatures that have been going up since 1970. As you can see, we've got kind of 2020's had this kind of few spikes in the last few years. That 1.5 degree limit is where we're getting dangerously close to. So yeah, you can see that the need for action is extraordinarily urgent. This is the kind of trajectory we need to get down on to meet our targets. Even if we're going to get to this kind of 2050 national target, you can see the amount of reductions we need to get to stick within that safe limit for climate. So we're not going to get there by quick wins, low-hanging fruit alone. You know, we have to make some very serious changes to the way we do everything in the next 9 years if we're going to meet our targets in Bristol, which are to be a carbon neutral and climate resilient city by 2030. So this is, if you haven't seen this already, this document is the One City Climate Strategy that was produced and launched last year by the Environment Board and lots of other kind of city partners working together. And the goal is for all businesses in there, it says it's all the goal that Bristol's businesses will be carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2030. So that's kind of the idea that we're trying to get to here, that all the businesses here, we're going to get to that kind of carbon neutral, although I would say net zero, but we'll come on to that. Okay, so that's where we're headed. That's where we need to get to. So how do we do it? I'm having to admit all these people into the waiting room. Okay, I'll just keep admitting them. All right, so first of all, I think it's really important if you're starting on your climate action journey that you're literate around the terms that are used. Apologies for those of you who this is kind of obvious, but yeah, this is a really good place to start. So scope 1 emissions, what are they? This is where you're actually combusting fossil fuels on your site. So that's in your buildings or in your vehicles. So is there actually fuel being burnt by you? So that would be, yeah, it's usually going to be on-site heating and also fleet fuel. Scope 2 emissions are your indirect emissions. That's when emissions are happening elsewhere to provide electricity to you. You're normally in a power station, and that's just the electricity that you buy. And today we're just going to focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions, because scope 3 is a much more complex topic, and scope 3 is likely to be your biggest impact because it's your everything else. It's everything you buy, it's your supply chain emissions, it's your business travel, it's the flights that you take, it's the you know, all of these things in manufacturing a product if they're manufactured off site. So it's likely to be maybe 80 or 90% of your footprint, but we're not going to focus on that today because we need to get the scope 1 and 2 nailed. So what do the different terms mean? So there's often confusion around all of these different terms: carbon neutral, net zero, zero carbon. So I'll give you a quick rundown. Carbon neutral means that you have purchased carbon offsets equivalent to the amount of emissions that you produce. It's kind of a slightly more outdated term and idea, and actually it does feature in the Bristol climate strategy, which I just showed you. But I would say now the last couple of years, we've been moving much towards the net zero idea, which I'll tell you about in a second. And carbon neutral doesn't explicitly require you to make any reductions to be able to make the claim. So you could just be emitting as normal, and you just buy a number of offsets equal to that, and you balance it, and you can say we're a carbon neutral organization. That's not best practice. We will not solve the climate crisis unless we significantly reduce our emissions and then offset like only when we have to. So basically there's not enough land, there's not enough trees that we can plant to carry on as we are and then offset everything. So zero carbon is the best case scenario. That's actually when your emissions themselves are down to zero. In other words, you're not emitting any greenhouse gases at all. You don't need to offset because you're not producing anything. So obviously this is the best case scenario. It is potentially possible for your scope 1 and 2 emissions, but it's basically impossible for scope 3 because everything has a carbon impact that we do. So it'd be very, very, very difficult to be a truly zero carbon operation unless you lived in the woods with solar panels. So net zero carbon is the thing that we're aiming for, which is you've reduced your absolute emissions as low as feasibly possible. And then and only then have you balanced the remaining emissions with good quality offsets. So this is what we're going for, but don't just remember that not all net zero commitments are equal because there's not a kind of agreed level by which you need to reduce your emissions. It's kind of, not if someone says I'm net zero and someone else says I'm net zero, it will mean different things depending on the calculations they've used. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. So where are your scope 1 emissions going to be coming from? So that's going to be your heating, your gas and oil boilers, if you're on oil, unlucky, but gas, most of us probably if we're based in Bristol will be on gas boilers for heating. Your company vehicles, so that's your fleet. So this is actual vehicles that you own, or lease, I suppose. So this would be vans, company cars, any kind of company vehicle that you have. This does not include your commuting or employees using their cars for business travel or anything like that. It's literally the ones you own and operate yourself. It's also refrigerants, so because they're actually very potent greenhouse gases as well. So if you have air conditioning, fridges and freezers, that's something to be aware of because if there's leaks, that could actually also be very harmful. And then there'll be specific equipment. So depending on, I saw East Bristol Bakery here, I suppose you've got ovens and things. So I don't know whether they're gas or if people are using hobs or things like that. So yeah, you really need to think about where that gas is being burnt. So how are you going to get to net zero for your heating? Well, you can improve building efficiency, you can improve insulation and draft proofing, all that kind of thing that we've heard about a million times before, but it's really important to get that load down, or the demand that your boiler is going to need to heat the building. There's behavioral changes and all those other ones we've already heard before as well, like turning down the thermostat, wrapping up, putting on a jumper before you turn up the heat. And then the important one, which we're all going to have to do at some point, is we're going to need to replace our boiler with a low carbon or renewable technology. So for hot water, that could be a solar hot water system if you've got roof space, or it could be an air source heat pump, or perhaps this district heating network, which Bristol will be developing over the next decade. So I expect that initiatives are going to come later. I don't have any information about financial initiatives like that. I hope the government will come through and kind of help us do this, but it's worth bearing in mind that you will probably have to replace your boiler at some point with a different solution to heat your building. Yes. Right, so company vehicles, how are we going to get to zero emissions from them? If you don't have any company vehicles, great, don't get one. And if you do have one, then perhaps can you reduce the number that you need? So can you find alternatives? I know lots of businesses in Bristol are using things like cargo bikes to deliver things around, that's great. Bikes, bikes, cargo bikes, scooter, public transport, all these kinds of things. Can we reduce the amount of miles that you're doing in the car for your deliveries or anything like that? For vehicles that you definitely need, then at some point we'll need to switch those to electric vehicles to become and also become part of the electric charging network. So Yeah, so we'll need to move away from the fossil fuel vehicles if we're going to get to zero carbon. Although just bear in mind that they're not a silver bullet, the electric vehicles, because obviously they have, the batteries are quite harmful and that kind of thing, and they don't solve anything about the congestion issues we have in Bristol as well. So yes, we do need to switch to electric vehicles, but only if we need them. Refrigerants, I just wanted to mention because people forget about them a bit, but actually, you know, they're very powerful greenhouse gases. In fact, just 1 kilo of certain refrigerants has the same greenhouse gas impact as 2 tons of carbon dioxide. So that's like running your car for 6 months. So basically, if you have fridges and freezers, make sure they're energy efficient appliances. I know there's probably some food businesses here. Make sure that you're having regular services by trained professionals. Make sure you don't have leaks in your systems. And make sure that whenever you're getting rid of them, that they're responsibly disposed of. You know, definitely when you see things like fridges fly tip, that's not a good thing. And then for specific equipment, you know, if your business has specific stuff, I can't tell you because there's 55 people on the call, so I'm not sure what you have, but you're going to need to have a think about where you're burning fossil fuels on your premises and how you can reduce that. So if you have loads of gas hobs, for example, can you switch to energy efficient induction hobs and power those by renewable electricity? If you run events and you have diesel generators, can you switch to veg oil, that kind of thing? So that's how we reduce the emissions from scope 1. So what about scope 2 emissions? What is scope 2 emissions? That's going to come from the electricity that you buy. And that is it. That is where your scope 2 emissions come from. So the important question to ask is, what tariff are you on? You need to switch to a proper green electricity tariff, like Good Energy or Ecotricity. And the reason, and as Alice said, Simon Roberts has written a great blog about choosing a proper electricity supplier because they are not all created equal. Certain green electricity suppliers actually invest in making new electricity, solar and wind electricity capacity. So they're building new turbines, they're installing new solar panels. Other companies buy credits. So it's a little bit like offsets, and then they sell you like an offset kind of situation. So do your homework and make sure that you choose a good tariff. Big Clean Switch is a really good resource to help you compare tariffs. And often it's not going to be more expensive to do this. So there really is no excuse. If you have space, you can of course install your own renewables like solar panels. That's awesome. If you can do that, great. And especially if you consume quite a lot of electricity in the daytime as part of your business, then that's a very good idea. You'll save money as well, probably. But anyway, if there's one action I'd like everyone to do for this call is if you are not already on a green tariff, do that as your action, because that is the most impactful, easiest and probably cheapest thing that you can do, because you're paying for electricity anyway, and the cost is probably going to be negligible difference. And everyone needs to do this. So quick thing of like, what if I work from home? A lot of us are working from home, obviously. Switch to a home green tariff. That's good. I'm on Good Energy. It's great. It's yeah, really easy then. What if you have a landlord who deals with the energy supply? Oh, well, yeah, write to them and ask them and speak to them about the need to get to net zero, bring them on the journey, see if other tenants, if you're in a kind of co-working space or something like that, see if other tenants will like join write the letter with you or sign the letter with you. And the more people ask, the more likely the people are going to do it. Get your landlord to come to these meetings, invite them along here. We'd love to see them. And then I found this resource called the Green Lease Toolkit, which helps you set up green tenancy agreements. So if there might be some useful resources in there when you can actually kind of write things into your contract that you're looking for things like green electricity tariffs. Right, I know I don't have very long, so I'm just going to share with you a few tools that might help, because a lot of people are like, okay, I need to start measuring this stuff. Of course, you can use a spreadsheet. You know, some people like spreadsheets, some of us don't. There are tools out there that you can use. So if you're a sole trader or micro business, I saw in the sign up information, quite a lot of you here are micro businesses. So you're just like 1 or 2 people. You might want to consider doing a personal carbon footprint, understand where your emissions are coming from. That might be the quickest way to calculate your emissions. Climate Partner have a really cool carbon footprinting tool. Personal one that they've just launched. So you can check that out. That's free to use. If you're kind of like a small to medium-sized business, the personal one isn't going to work for you. But there's quite a lot of really good tools online that you can use instead of a spreadsheet, where you put in the information and it will help you kind of create some graphs. And some of them will actually also link up with your, when we're getting onto scope 3 and stuff, when you're buying stuff, it'll link up with your Xero or QuickBooks accounting software, and it'll help to estimate your carbon footprint from there. So that's quite helpful. So Spherix, Compare Your Footprint, Carbon Analytics, these are all good tools that you can check out. Spherix are based in Bristol and they're a member of the partnership. So yeah, definitely really worth checking these out. And they're very competitively priced and will be a lot cheaper than kind of hiring a consultant to do this. But if you are a bit bigger or growing or more complex, you can definitely look into working with a carbon consultant who will help you map your carbon footprint and help you set up those measurement systems. And sometimes that's going to be a really good option. And I've just put the names of a couple of organizations I know that do that, but I know there's some in Bristol who do that as well in the partnership. So make yourself known in the chat if you do that. Okay, and I've just got maybe a minute or two left, but basically, if you want to get to net zero, if you can get to absolute zero, then amazing on scope 1 and 2. I work with some companies who have achieved this. It's possible, and it's doable. If you can't get to absolute zero, then you want to get to net zero, and you're going to balance what's left by choosing a good offsetting partner. I could speak for hours about offsets. I don't have time today, but I think we need to do that at a future event. I've put the names of a few reputable companies here. Remember, it's not just about planting trees, it's also about protecting coastal habitats, things like mangroves, and then also things like grasslands and peatlands. If we protect those places, they also sequester a lot of carbon. So maybe look beyond just planting trees, even though everyone thinks about planting trees. And remember, beware techno fixes. We need now, not new. We can't wait for these kind of unproven technologies, like these massive turbines that suck carbon out of the air supposedly and store them, which I know a lot of people in Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk and people like that, are all really into. But we really need, we have trees, we have plants, we have all these things that we know work, and we need to scale those up as quickly as possible. And also we need to think about climate justice and whether your offsets are compounding existing inequalities or whether they're helping to alleviate them. So that's a really important point. And again, another thing that we could go into a lot of detail on. So once you've done all that, then you're ready for the next level, which is scope 3 emissions, which will be a future event, I'm sure. But if you're eager to crack on, I've put an FAQ document here, which came out of one of the climate leaders meetings, and I'll link to that. You can link to that in these slides. Also, if you want some great resources, B Corp have put together the B Climate Tools Base, which is a fantastic, fantastic index of resources to help you get started, from everything on getting buy-in in your company to measuring emissions to communicating it. So there's such a great index of resources here, and I've put a link, and there's a 10-minute walkthrough video to explain how it works there. Okay, that's everything. Hope that's helpful. Looking forward to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for acknowledging that we must all start somewhere, and for breaking down the complex jargon into bite-sized and accessible chunks. It's great to have your clarity and energy and wide-ranging perspective in this conversation. So now we're going to move over to Annabel Harford of Avon Fire Rescue Service, who will be talking about their organisation's journey to reduce carbon emissions. So over to you, Annabel.
There we go. Right, can everybody hear me? Great. Right, let me just... Okay. Right, and can you see my screen okay? Can you see the slides? Yeah. Okay. Right, so thank you very much, and I'm really delighted to be invited to this first Climate Action Breakfast to talk about Avon Fire Rescue Service's climate action journey. So I've been the environmental manager at the fire service for 5 years, and I'm in a team of one. There's me on the environmental side, but lots of great colleagues who help and support along the way. So I'm often asked what I do and why is it relevant to a fire service. So as a fire service, we're on the front line in responding to the increasing impacts of climate change, such as flooding and wildfire. And in fact, one of our legal duties is to protect the environment through our operations. So with 22 buildings, 850 staff, a fleet of 180 vehicles, half of which are fire engines, very high water use, use of toxic firefighting foams, and the opportunity to reduce environmental impacts at our operations by putting out fires, containing spills, reducing harm and damage of flooding. We've obviously have a significant role to play in reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change. And also, as a popular public-facing emergency service, we can act as a high-profile catalyst for wider action. So what I want to do is to give you, to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour and give you a flavour of where we started, where we are now, and what next in our climate action journey, as well as some of the challenges and lessons we've learned along the way. So I don't expect everybody to read the detail in this slide, but this is just sort of a bit of a capture of our journey along the climate, along sort of climate action and response to climate change. So it really sort of started back in 2009 when an environmental officer was first recruited at the fire service. And at that point, we had a footprint of about 3,500 tonnes. We have had an estate of very inefficient and carbon intensive buildings, predominantly heated by oil boilers. We had no renewables. We had a lack of heating controls. We had inefficient lighting, no automatic meter readings, and an average display energy certificate rating of F. It was an all diesel fleet in place, and we barely even had any recycling. So the first steps that were taken were with the support of the Carbon Trust to develop a 5-year carbon management plan, through which we established a baseline of emissions and agreed a scope for our emissions in order to measure our carbon footprint. So this included all the emissions from the activities we control. So obviously the scope 1 and 2, building energy consumption, gas, electricity and heating oil, and fleet vehicle fuel. So we also in fact included in our footprint our business travel and water consumption, which are strictly scope 3, but we still include those in our sort of baseline footprint for continuity purposes. And in order to produce our footprint, we very much use greenhouse gas protocol guidance, also guidance from the Carbon Trust, and in order to calculate the carbon emissions, use the carbon emission factors from DEFRA. So sort of on an ongoing basis, we've carried out a wide number of energy and sort of wider environmental audits in order to identify opportunities for improvement. And those audits, again, very much follow Carbon Trust guidance. We also put an environmental policy in place and set targets for basically a 5% reduction per year in carbon emissions, with a 50% reduction target by 2020. We also did a lot of communications within our organisation. So how are we doing so far? So in fact, we've had another year's emissions data come in after this graph was produced, but that obviously shows that we reached our 2020 target 2 years ahead of time. And in fact, we're currently at about a 64% reduction since our baseline. So we have a total carbon footprint now of around 1,500 tonnes. So you'll notice from that graph that there's been a sort of flip in the significant sources of our carbon emissions. So at the outset, it was pretty well 2/3, 3/4 our buildings, and the rest transport. And now we're looking at more of a 50-50 split, as you will see in this slide. And on the right also is just a little graphic to show how that breaks down by employee, which is sometimes a useful way to communicate our emissions and sort of make it slightly more tangible. So just a few snapshots there. Some of the measures that we've put into place and where we are now is we've improved our data sources a lot. We have nearly all of our meters are automatic, including our water meters, and all of this information gets thrown into an energy management portal where we can analyze and collate the data. We also, for example, require in all of our waste contracts that waste data is weighed data and not just average or generalized. We've got an average building display energy certificate rating of C, and that's largely because we've replaced all but one of our oil boilers with gas. We've done the obvious things like LED lighting, improved building fabric. We've installed building management systems for better optimized control of heating and hot water in most of our large buildings. We've got 9 PV systems, 1 solar thermal. We've innovated, for example, rather than traditional boiler heated drying rooms, we've put in dehumidifiers instead. We're on 100% renewable electricity and green gas tariffs. We've got a program in place of building net zero fire stations. We've made a lot of efficiencies in water use, both by better leak detection, but also changing policies around how frequently we wash our vehicles, a key part of station life for many firefighters. We recycle, we've got very high recycling rates, and that includes food waste, hazardous waste. We even send old firefighting hose to the zoo for the monkeys and the elephants. We've started bringing electric vehicles onto our fleet. We joined the Co-Wheels Car Club to provide alternative low emissions pool cars. And we've, again, changed some of our policies around how we respond to, for example, fire alarms. So that's greatly reduced vehicle movements, particularly over the last year. We've got an environmental management system in development, and we've also established a sort of self-assessment mechanism so we can track our progress on sustainable procurement, which is very much sort of part of our Scope 3 work. So what next? We've recently produced a 10-year environmental strategy. This encompasses all of our climate mitigation and adaptation work, as well as environmental protection. And central to the strategy is our ambitious and sector-leading commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2030. And that's very much in alignment with our four local authorities, of course, Bristol being one of them. In fact, I think we're the only fire and rescue service in the country who's set such an ambitious goal. We've also mapped out our aims against the relevant sustainable development goals, recognizing that tackling climate change is key to the sustainable development goals aim to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure shared prosperity. So moving on, this is sort of just a bit of a graphic representation of how we think we'll get to net zero. So we developed a net zero calculation tool, really, with a lot of support from Simon Pine and his associates from Greener Energy Futures. He'll be speaking a bit later. So this helps us map out a clear route to net zero, so we can basically plug in planned measures that we plan to put into place and calculate the carbon, predicted carbon emission reduction, as well as the sort of costs of those. And then we can see what gap we've got left to fill. And you'll notice that by the time we get to 2029, 30, any remaining emissions we will be meeting by offsets or onsets. We would always look at offsets as being an absolute last resort. And in fact, what we'd prefer to do is to inset instead by investing in our own supply chain and employees to reduce their emissions rather than investing in an external offsetting scheme. So far, we seem to be doing quite well. We're already ahead of target. So this slightly complicated graph shows the green bars are our actual performance. The green dotted line is obviously the sort of the pathway to net zero. The light blue line is if we just carried on business as usual, didn't do anything, with the drop being due to the reduced carbon intensity of the mains grid electricity and more biodiesel in fuel station diesel. And then the dark blue line is the pathway that we've actually mapped out by plugging in measures that we plan to put into place. Now you'll see that our actual emissions are lower than that. And I think that is probably largely because of the change in policy that I mentioned earlier around reduced sort of vehicle movements due to the way we respond to fire alarms, which is quite interesting that it's made such a big difference. Our Fire Authority has recently declared climate and ecological emergencies, which means that the issues and our actions are now in full sight of our Fire Authority and senior management, as well as external partners. We've also been very lucky we've been successful in being awarded a very large grant from the public sector decarbonisation scheme. Just recently, one of only 2 emergency services across the whole country to have been successful. And this will really help us to accelerate some of the measures to decarbonise our buildings. For example, air source heat pumps, PV, battery storage, energy efficiency, and linking in with the Bristol district heating scheme. Another thing on the horizon is we will soon be trialling a prototype of an electric fire engine, which is very exciting because that's probably the biggest challenge we still face in terms of how to get to net zero. We're also looking at the moment at considering which scope 3 emissions we'll include in our footprint in the future. And we've got a fantastic student, Claire, who's working with the Greener Energy Futures, who's mapping out our scope 3 emissions and starting to quantify and identify the most significant areas for us to focus on, which, as you can see, are around employee commuting and our purchased goods and services. So this is just another graphic really just to show sort of the analysis of scope 3 emissions by their emissions intensity and what we spend on them. So just to wrap up a bit, I just thought I'd point to a few of our key challenges and some top tips. So key challenges really, as I said, in a state of poorly maintained old building stock with a lot of asbestos in it. Diesel guzzling fire engines, which are quite a difficult one to work out. So hopefully the electric fire engines will be a bit of a solution there. We've had a historically silo approach taken by sort of various key departments across the organisation, which make it really hard to have a comprehensive and joined up approach to climate action. There's been a disconnect between frontline operations and back office activities, but actually climate change action neatly brings these together. Also a misunderstanding that environmental issues all lie with the environment manager. So quite a job there to push out the responsibility and embed sort of environmental best practice across the organisation. And also historically, environmental issues and climate action not seen as a priority or important, but this is changing and this is changing fast. So the questions are no longer why do we have to do it and why is it important, but increasingly what are we doing about it or why aren't we doing more? And lastly, some top tips. So I would say probably the key factors that I've found are get buy-in and keep the conversation going, engage and re-engage with your colleagues and management to understand their perspectives, priorities and interests, but whilst also challenging their views and demonstrating new approaches. Get your contractors on board and involve them. Collaborate and network. You're definitely not alone, as this group I think nicely shows. It is important to go for the practical, low-hanging fruits, and tangible measures you can take. But it's definitely not all sexy. There's lots of work around sort of meters, bins, fuel tanks, etc. And sometimes it can be the small behind-the-scene things that make the biggest differences. I would also say it's important to keep abreast of innovation and best practice. For example, with this group or for example, through networks like the IEMA membership network. I think it's also important to mention, we obviously are really talking about the climate emergency here, but also important to always bear in mind the ecological emergency and give that equal weight and be nature conscious in all your decisions. And I think above all, when the going gets tough, try and remain positive. And as a wise friend of mine once said to me, just keep your eyes on the carbon. So lastly, I would just say that the fire service can be a pretty hard nut to crack. But I would say that if Fire and Rescue Services and Avon Fire and Rescue Service can rise to the challenge of meaningfully addressing climate change, then I'm sure so can all of you. So on that note, thanks for your time, and I hope I've given you some ideas and inspiration to start or keep going with your own journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabel, for sharing your experience and learnings, challenges and top tips. It's both useful and heartening to hear how Avon Fire Rescue Service are directly responding to the effects of the climate crisis and your journey to net zero and how you're playing a huge part in this city's transformation. Really just showing us how all corners of the city are starting to engage, understand and take action. So we're going to move on to a Q&A now. So if anyone has any questions that arose from Jessica and Annabel's presentations, now's the time to share them with the panelists in this Q&A session. So if you would like to ask a question directly to Jessica and or Annabel, please just raise your Zoom hand. You just go to, you click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screens and select raise hand, and then we'll be able to see who'd like to ask a question. So please feel free, the floor is open. So I think we've got Trish from St George, so fire away.
Hiya. It's a question for, well, Annabel, I guess. We're struggling in terms of getting staff across the wider team to really engage with the climate emergency and kind of help me form a little green working party. And as you said at the beginning, you're a team of one. So I was just interested to know if you had any particular strategies or advice for getting colleagues to, yeah, sort of show up and help.
So this is a tricky one. As you can imagine, so we across all of our fire stations, you know, most of our staff are operational and work on sort of on a shift basis. So, and often move around quite a lot to being sort of allocated to different locations and stations. So it's a bit like pinning jelly to the wall to sort of try and nominate specific people at specific sites. So we did have a Green Champion scheme in place. but because of those reasons, it was proving pretty tricky to try and really keep that going. And also it seemed to keep coming back to the environmental person or myself to, you know, to provide most of this sort of input and guidance. So what we've moved more towards is by making sure that we've kind of got a drip feed sort of flow of measures which will engage people. So, for example, we've sort of facilitated the development of well-being, outdoor well-being spaces on our stations, which obviously, you know, can have a sort of element of biodiversity and tree planting, etc. But put the ownership onto the sort of station, you know, give the ownership to the station staff. So it's very much their, you know, their projects to sort of implement. And I think it's, yeah, just sort of trying to roll out different communications and activities or projects which will engage different sectors of our staff. So as you can imagine, sort of things like, you know, cycling initiatives are pretty popular. And as I said, the sort of well-being spaces, but, you know, and putting out, developing different types of training modules. But I think it's really, yeah, I think we found it works better through action rather than sort of trying to have a formalized network of sort of staff. But I guess in your, so, you know, in your circumstances, it might be slightly easier if you've kind of got a slightly more static group of people. So I don't know if any of that's of any help.
That's really helpful, thank you. We've got a mixed model of sort of permanent, casual volunteers.
Okay.
Lots of different people. So that jelly to the wall analogy is sort of very similar, very resonates with me.
Okay. Good luck.
I just have a few things I can share on that actually, Trish. There's one, well, I think really good ways to ask people like that, like Annabel was saying. I mean, I think it's really good to ask your team what they feel like they, you know, maybe do a little survey, find out what they feel like they know, where the gaps are, what they'd like to know more about, and engage them in it. And there's quite a few organisations that can help. So there's one that I know about. They're not local, but they're called Make Tomorrow, and they do carbon literacy training. I'll pop a link in the chat, but like that, so they have like, you could consider doing it as part of your onboarding process whenever you have a new member of staff, and you kind of embed sustainability training into your onboarding training. That's really good. There's also Do Nation, where you can run kind of fun kind of competition style events, where not events, but like campaigns where people make pledges to live more sustainably for a period of time, usually a month or 2 months. And then you kind of and then you can kind of slip in messages around what you're trying to do and how you're trying to be more sustainable. So it could be like people pledge to cycle to work every day instead of drive, or eat less meat or whatever. And it's quite a fun way to do that. And it's all logged on a portal. And I've worked with lots of companies who've done that with quite good success. And then also Livy Drake, Sustainable Psychic, she's based in Bristol. She does lots of kind of behavior change training as well. So she could be one to look for. I've just put those links in the chat for you. So I hope that's helpful.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks, Jessica and Annabel. Some really tangible and worthwhile advice there that I think will be of real benefit. Catherine, I think you've got your hand up, so fire away.
Hi, yeah. My name's Catherine Nash. I'm the business manager at the Botteyard Studios in South Bristol. So for those who don't know, we're a local authority owned and managed business, but operate commercially. So we have a real disconnect and we don't quite fit the mould of the council's working processes. So my question really is to both Annabel and Jessica. Annabel, you mentioned that you accessed the public sector decarbonisation scheme. We've been unsuccessful in our applications. I've submitted 3 now, 2 with the Salix repayment scheme and 1 with the grant funding. And unfortunately, we've not been successful. And each time it's on a technicality. So I wonder how is the best way to go about baselining an organisation's carbon output, because I feel like without this fundamental baseline information of our carbon outputs, and I can articulate where we're carbon heavy. I very much know where we're weak and what we need to improve on, but I feel like we need a study to say where we are now, so that therefore we can set tangible and measurable targets to where we want to be and how we're going to get there. So I wonder if there's, Annabel, did you undertake any such feasibility at the beginning of your journey? And if you didn't, have you got any advice as to how we might go about that, funding, basically, because there is no funding in the council to do any of this.
So right at the beginning, as I think I mentioned, we worked with the Carbon Trust, who at that point, sort of around 2009, 2010, were helping a lot of public sector organisations to put in place carbon management plans. So the first step of that was to establish a baseline. And, when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, it is not that exciting. It is, at that point, it was literally scouring through energy bills to work out, how much you're consuming across all the different sites. Might sound easy, but it definitely wasn't at that point, with a lot of, we virtually had different suppliers for every single site that we own. So it was really working out the sort of consumption data. It was, looking at how much fuel we were buying from either directly into deliveries into our fuel tanks on stations, or from petrol stations, etc. So that's how the initial footprint was basically put together and established, and then from there it was looking at what was realistic and practical in terms of what sort of targets could be set. And I'm a great believer in for example, with our net zero target, we don't know how we're going to get to net zero yet, but I'm a great believer in sort of thinking, well, where do you want to be, and then working out how you're going to get there, rather than sort of at this point in time worrying about how you might get there in 10 years time. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. I mean, I know, the Carbon Trust produce, good information on sort of putting in place, establishing baseline emissions, some of which might be sort of more relevant to public sector organisations, although effectively we're all really trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Jessica's got a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's all right what you said, Annabelle. I think also some of those tools that I shared in my presentation and some of those resources really help you figure out where you can start and using those online tools. And if funding and capacity is a problem, you could consider getting a summer intern from UWE or University of Bristol to, you can often get those for very, you only have to pay a very small amount. I'll just put the link in the chat.
We are looking at that now.
Yeah, and like if you get them to run that project, they would love that, and they can probably do all the baseline and put it all in the tool, get it all set up for you, and then you'd have it. So I think that's a really good way to start.
Brilliant, thank you.
Some really great advice there, just and showing what initiatives are available, and really just a reminder that we don't always know where the end goal is, but we just need to start and figure it out along the way. So has anybody else got any more questions? So one of the questions that did come up during the registration stage that seemed to be quite a popular concern or area of interest for people, so it might be worth just raising that to Annabel and Jessica now. It was really just about getting some advice on engaging and working with or influencing stakeholders and suppliers to adopt changes in order to reduce carbon emissions. So I don't know if either of you have got any thoughts that you might like to respond to that question with.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I'm sure Annabel has some practical tips as well. I think, like I said before, I think one of the best ways that you can engage the stakeholders is kind of by engaging them and by asking them what they think and what they think you should be working on and how they can be involved. I do quite a lot of work with my clients on stakeholder engagement. So that would be basically to help inform the sustainability strategy they then produce. So we might do things like surveys. We work with quite a lot of consumer brands. So we'll do like consumer surveys, or we'll do supplier surveys. And then we'll also speak to a range of their stakeholders, whether it's their retail partners or their employees as well, very important stakeholders that you can't overlook, and maybe investors or board of directors. And through surveys and interviews, you can kind of build up a sense of what's important to them. But also it's really important to then bring them on the journey. And I think what's really noticeable is when you actually start asking these questions, people are really happy to be asked, and they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're talking to me about these things. This is amazing. And some of the suppliers of the brands that I work with, sometimes when we speak to their suppliers and we say, asking them all these questions about the sourcing and the ethical sourcing of the ingredients and all this kind of thing, and they're like, no one else asks us these questions. So I think just, starting that conversation somewhere is a really good way to get going. And if you're talking about getting senior level kind of buy-in in the organization, like perhaps you're a sustainability manager or you're just someone who's like in an operations role and you're trying to get your board of directors involved or your kind of senior managers, I think it's just kind of setting an occasion or putting a regular place in your board meetings where you talk about sustainability. You might want to provide them with some resources, send them some documentaries or arrange a film screening, or I think it's one of those things when you get confronted with the facts around climate change and how quickly we need to change things, and especially around the fact that Bristol has this net zero target for 2030. That's 9 years. The most ambitious businesses that I work with are setting net zero targets for 2030, but everyone in Bristol's kind of had one for them. Every business in Bristol's had a net zero target set for them, and a lot of people don't realize that yet. And it's good that you're all here because but like we need to get on with it. So I think if you present those facts to the board, and also position it as this opportunity to be leaders and the opportunity to really step into it, I think, and a lot of people emotionally connect with that. I think there can be some emotional connection that's done towards that. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sure Annabel has something to share on that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to focus in on the sort of supply chain element of this, and in terms of sort of influencing and engaging stakeholders in our supply chain. I was just going to give a few examples of some of the things that we've done. So, for example, as I sort of said, one of the sort of top tips was, having your contractors on board. So, for example, I've spent a lot of time working with our M&E, so mechanical and electrical contractors who basically, to a degree, look after our buildings, and also, for example, our building management system maintenance contractor, our drainage contractors, people. I've spent quite a bit of time with them working on different sort of measures, and they know all about our net zero commitment and our environmental strategy. And in fact, it's now kind of got to the point where they will now contact me to point out problems, issues, people turning up thermostats, all sorts of stuff like that across our different stations if they think there are persistent problems, and they also identify opportunities. So they really are sort of my eyes and ears on the ground. The work that we're doing around that Simon and Claire have been helping with on Scope 3, we're going to be sharing that information with my procurement, the Avon Fire Rescue Service procurement team and other colleagues, and then hopefully using that to engage with suppliers and sort of saying to them, well as our reducing our own emissions from Scope 1 and 2, we're also looking at Scope 3, and which effectively are our suppliers' Scopes 1 and 2, and asking them what they're looking at, what they'll be doing to reduce their emissions. And on the sort of procurement front, other things that we're doing, for example, are integrating questions or requirements or specifications which help us to reduce our emissions, but integrating those within the sort of procurement process. So, for example, from now onwards, all of our tenders and contracts that we'll be putting out will be requiring contractors and suppliers to have clean air zone compliant vehicles. We will, in a lot of our tenders and procurement exercises, be asking questions around their own net zero commitments, and obvious things like, for example, the sort of recycling content of packaging they use, whether sort of batteries in equipment that they're providing are rechargeable, etc. So trying to sort of embed that from the get-go, really, to get the right suppliers on board in the first place. So yeah, I think there's just a few practical steps we're taking there.
Some really practical advice there, Annabel, and really just pointing towards accountability at all levels, and Jessica, again, just opportunity, raising the fact that it's a challenge ahead, but it's also an opportunity to engage on a really deep level. So thank you. We're now going to move into some pitches. So we've got 5 people who are going to be pitching their services and products to support you and your organisation on your carbon reduction journey. So we're going to start with Anna Bradshaw from Gicky Social Enterprise with the first 60-second pitch. So over to you, Anna.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen quickly there. Do you all see that? Excellent. So good morning, Bristol. I'm Anna Bradshaw and I'm here from Gicky. And we are a social enterprise and our mission is to help people live more sustainably. So we focus on individuals because 75% of all the greenhouse gases actually comes from people. And sometimes your staff's carbon footprint can be 10 times higher than that of your operational footprint. So we're here because we hope we can help Bristol with that target in 2030, because it needs to include everyone, every person, every employee, every student, every citizen of Bristol. So Gicky Zero Pro is our web app, and we do 3 things. We help staff understand and track and reduce the footprint on the planet. And by working together in teams and leaderboards and seeing joint achievements, it's very good for engagement. And thirdly, we give all the sustainability leads in organizations a way of driving that engagement long term by giving you a toolkit on a monthly basis that you can help everyone get excited about reducing the carbon footprint for individuals. And why are we doing this? Well, because it's a climate crisis and we all need to, in wealthy countries, we all need to reduce our carbon emission about 50% before the end of the decade. So we are priced with the mission in mind. We range from 30 to 80p per person per month. And I'm happy to help and happy to give more information. Check us out on the website, and we're happy to give demos to anyone that wants to. And we also give community groups a 70% discount because they're very key in this, we think. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks so much. Great to hear from you and your and Gicky service. So next up, we've got John Sankey from Bristol City Council.
Okay, just going to share my screen. Can you see that all right? Can you see? Sorry, I'm not sure which screen you can see. Can you see that? Yeah, can you see mine? Yeah, good. Okay. Okay, so heat networks have been identified as one of the key solutions to decarbonisation of heat in urban areas in the UK. They're like a giant central heating system with hot water pumped through large insulated pipes around the city to buildings which transfer that heat to their own heating and hot water systems. In Copenhagen, for example, 95% of the buildings are connected to a heat network. The Bristol Heat Network is now live, and we want to hear from buildings and organisations that might want to connect. We'll be totally reliant on renewable sources by 2030. We have our first water source heat pump going into the floating harbour, which will be online from next year. We're committed to being price competitive with other low carbon solutions, for example, air source heat pumps. The heat priority area here shows the extent to which the heat network could eventually reach. That's the long-term goal. But for now, we're focused on 8 key network areas, which will all eventually connect up, providing resilience and flexibility. Redcliffe and Old Market networks are live, with connected buildings and more becoming connected imminently. But the Temple and Bedminster networks, which are being constructed, Froome Gateway, City Centre, Spike Island and Ashton Gate are in feasibility or planning. So if you want to learn more about benefiting from low carbon, reliable, good value heat, then please get in contact to discuss getting connected. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Great pitch there. So next up, we've got Marion Britton from West of England Combined Authority. Over to you, Marion.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm from the West of England Combined Authority. We've got a great offer open at the moment for small and medium-sized enterprises, and that's funded by the European Union through their ERDF programme and funded by WECA itself. So the first part is a free carbon survey. So we've talked a lot this morning about that being really the first step, is understanding what your energy use is, where your carbon emissions are coming from, and also what you can do about it to improve that. And we provide that in a free report to you. Secondly, we've got a capital grant of up to £15,000 that will help you implement some of your energy saving projects to your buildings and your business operations. That will cover 50 to 80% of your eligible costs, depending on where you are and what your project is. So the carbon survey offer is open all year. The Green Business Grant, the 15k grant, is open until 25th of June, but there'll be another grant round later in the autumn. So I've put a link in the chat, so do have a look on our web page, and basically you fill in our expression of interest form, and you'll get sent all the documents that you need. That's great. That's all from me.
Thanks, Marion. I'm sure that will be of great help to many people here. Next up, we have Simon Pine of Greener Energy Futures.
Yeah, good morning. Let me just share my screen. And I should ask, as usual, if everybody can see that. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Okay, fine. So let me talk through. You can see the slideshow here. Let me talk to you two things. I see from the organisations we've got here today, commitment. You asked yourself why you want to reduce your carbon emissions. You've asked yourself perhaps what you can do, whether that's transport, buildings, or the things that you buy. And you've probably thought about some of the things that you can do, how you can get to net zero. Maybe that's electrifying your fleet, and maybe it's working from home. What we see is organisations perhaps struggle to put together a coherent plan that addresses all of these things. And that's what we do, Green Energy Futures. We build a clear plan for you to help address the climate crisis and net zero. We help you set clear and realistic objectives. We've worked with Avon Fire on these. We helped you to understand what projects can help you achieve net zero and identify the funding. We've identified and helped organisations secure £3.5 million of funding in the last 6 months alone. Here's the organisations we work with, and put together a 10-year plan for organisations to help them address net zero. So Greener Energy Futures, please get in touch.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button then. Thank you, Simon. Some really, really useful service offering there. So last but certainly not least, we've got Simon Whitehead from Zedify.
Hi there, just going to, I think Simon's still sharing his screen actually. and share my screen. Okay, can we do that? Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Simon Whitehead. I'm the MD of ZFI Bristol. We are Bristol's first fully electric urban logistics company and micro consolidation hub. An huge increase in online shopping and home delivery, we are facing increased congestion and as a consequence, increased air pollution. We want to make Bristol a cleaner, healthier and more livable city. Using our fleet of fast, efficient, pedal-assisted electric cargo bikes, trikes and vans, we can collect and deliver your items across Bristol, reducing congestion and air pollution. Our hub is conveniently located just on the edge of the proposed clean air zone. Here we act as a gateway for goods coming into the city and out of the city. We unload onto our vans, we unload vans and reload onto our e-cargo bikes, our trikes, and we deliver across the town in a fast, clean, cost-effective and efficient way. So start reducing your carbon impact and get started on your carbon action journey by swapping your old, inefficient diesel and petrol service to ZFI and join us in helping make Bristol a cleaner, healthier and more livable city. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Another great pitch there. So thank you to everybody who pitched just now, and thank you to Jessica and Annabel and to our team behind the scene, Clara and Claire, and to all of you, all of our attendees this morning who joined us for our first Climate Action Breakfast. I certainly found it incredibly informative and inspiring. We would love you to complete the feedback form, which will be shared in the chat. We really want to hear your views, get your ideas, and know how this programme is going to be useful and impactful. And it really helps us to shape our future activity and resources and how it's going to help your organisation. So please do share that with us today and let us know what your main takeaways are and anything you'd like to see covered in the future. The date for our first Intention to Action clinic is soon to be announced and will be focused on transport. There's been huge changes to the way people travel as a result of the pandemic, and the implementation of the Clean Air Zone this October will also have a big impact on the way people move around Bristol City. So this event will explore how businesses can make adjustments to their transport practices and support changes in how employees travel to work. You'll leave with ideas and inspiration on how to make positive changes within your organisation to lower your carbon emissions. So do keep an eye out for the next Climate Action Breakfast, which will be coming soon. And if you're not currently a partnership member, make sure you sign up, as this is the best way to receive updates about the Climate Action Programme and other activities. And do encourage your colleagues to do the same. We look forward to working with you in the coming months and years, and there's no time like the present. We hope to initiate that connection and collaboration right now at our networking session, and we hope you're able to join us. Just think of it like a tea and coffee like we'd normally have at a face-to-face event. So please do stay on. We'll put you into breakouts now for an optional networking session, which will be open to just after 9:15. And if you're not able to join, we hope to see you again soon. And thank you for joining and wish you all a great day.